You were watching Omnis Protocol. I am Charles, also known as Omnis, and with me is the most amazing Todd slash Cliff Jumper from Momentous Struggle. What's going on, my dude?
Man, I'm doing fantastic. It is great to be here and hanging out with you on Sunday afternoon.
Oh, absolutely. I'm just really, this is just an excuse for me to talk nerd stuff with all of my favorite people.
That's
And
awesome.
I was going to ask you, so I've been calling Aubrey the Momentous Panda, right?
Yeah.
You know the reference. If you don't know
Yep.
the reference, go listen to some Momentous Struggle. But what are you? Are you the momentous jumper? The momentous what would be my nickname for you? There hasn't been like a moment that stuck out to me to give you a nickname.
Yeah, I don't know if I really have one. When I was in high school, they used to call me Turtle. So maybe I'm the momentous turtle. So maybe that was it. I was always like because I always ran hunchbacked when I was Sid. So like if people said I looked like a turtle because I would stick my neck out and run hunchback. So yeah, I don't
Do
know.
you turtle up in Shatterpoint? Do you have the kind of like defensive? Because usually turtling is referred to as like getting your crew together in kind of a defensive like huddle sort of thing. Do you? But I don't feel like that's your play style either. So I'm
No, I'm
not sure
more
that works.
aggro. I'm
Yeah.
more aggro. My kids always say I'm a big teddy bear, so maybe that's why
Yeah.
I'm the momentous teddy bear.
You do have teddy bear vibes.
Yeah,
The momentous teddy. I don't know.
that sounds
Um,
like something late at night, but when you're with your partner.
all right. Well, watchers, I did record with Aubrey recently, so there's a good chance that around the same time that this comes out, there will also be some Aubrey slash Omnis chaos. Wild and momentous.
Yeah, I'm
So,
looking forward to hearing all of that nonsense that you guys did.
isn't that fun when you're not on your own episode and you get an
Yeah.
extra show to listen to?
Yes.
Uh, that was definitely sweet. But watchers, what we're gonna talk about today is kind of the adjustment that you make when you switch from a card game like Magic the Gathering, Yu-Gi-Oh, Pokemon, and now we have like Star Wars Unlimited. We have all sorts of card games, and in a lot of ways, it's a gateway for other parts of gaming. I definitely started with Magic the Gathering. I played an old cool Star Wars game. I forget what it was called, the card game back in like the 90s. But I definitely remember playing that one. But it's definitely Magic was my primary gateway. Is that about the same for you? You were a Magic player first, or were you a Warhammer guy or something like that
Oh no,
first?
no, I was a Magic player first by far.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been playing Magic since like the late 90s basically is kind of when I first got my taste of it, and then I got really big into it again after I got out of the military.
Yeah.
Kind of like found my place there, but yeah, definitely Magic was my start.
Mm. So it's interesting because I know a lot of people in the military will also get into Warhammer because it's so easy to play it wherever you're at. It's such a
Mhm.
big game. It gives you a hobby that you can do on a ship or like on a base where you're like painting your miniatures, and it gives you something to do. And then no matter where you're at, you can usually go find somewhere that's playing that particular game, even in another country, right?
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
pretty easy. So when I was made my first jump to miniatures, I was playing Magic and then stumbled onto D&D minis and Star Wars minis, and there's obviously like there's a lot to grasp in that shift. Um, you know, I'll let you. I have so many things I want to jump into, but I want to hear some Todd talk. So what do you think was the first thing for you to overcome kind of making that jump? Was it painting? Was it the dice element? Like what hit you first?
So for me, it had to have been the painting element because I went my journey from like starting with cars, moving over was a little different. I kind of did so I played Magic, then I went to play. I also played Dice Masters, which was like a card dice
Yeah,
game.
yeah.
So I played that for a little while when it was popular. Then I went into Hero Clicks, so like that kind of gave you a miniatures-esque feel, but I wouldn't say it's very miniatures like. So the painting aspect of it, I think, was probably the biggest challenge for me. And I think that's like looking at Aubrey and him coming over, this being his first game, definitely was a challenge for him. Like the building, the hobby side of it, I think is probably going to be the biggest challenge, I would think. At least it was for me.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I was actually just talking to a friend of mine, Joel, who I met him playing Star Wars minis, and he was at the game store yesterday playing Star Wars Unlimited, and but at the same time, I'd gotten him to play War Machine for quite a while, and he was very, very good at it, but he never liked the painting. And always just felt like that was a big, and he brought it up. Like he's like, that's always been the struggle with games like say Shatterpoint, just the getting over that painting hump can be a challenge for people. I think for me, one of the things that I was drawn to immediately because I knew so many Magic players when I started playing the miniatures games is that they were all like, "You're rolling dice. Don't you feel like the game is just random?" And like I got asked that a lot by like really good players, and it was a thing that at first I didn't entirely know the answer because I didn't feel like my games were random, but over time for me I've definitely felt like I lost way more games of Magic to a random order deck. Like,
Mhm.
or I call it order deck, a random draw, right?
Right.
Than I ever have in any of the miniatures games that I've ever played. Even when I played HeroClix for a little bit,
Right.
I never felt like any of them felt as random as playing a card game. And I'm not trying to like besmirch card games,
No.
but it's I think the perception that the dice make it more random than a random shuffle does is I think just a misconception.
I would
Do
say
you
that's a
kind of
very yeah, I would say that's a pretty big misconception simply because like yes, there's the RNG of dice, but there's statistical aspects to that that you can relate to like your dice there's probabilities of dice rolls. I mean, and you can take that into account while you're making your decisions where the probabilities, especially like within Magic, it's like, okay, you only have 4 copies of a deck of a card in a 60 card deck. And so probabilities on that are going to be even worse, which make your RNG, I think, even worse in some cases in Magic than they would be in the in tabletop wargaming.
Yeah, I fundamentally agree. And like sometimes you're just like, I know that my opponent's deck has 3 cards that will be a great counter. They've played one of them. They have 2 left. We have
Mhm.
only gone through like a third of the deck. What do I think the odds are that they have another copy of that?
Yeah,
And sometimes they just do, right? Like there's no, it doesn't matter what the odds are. They just have it. And so it's definitely an interesting element there. And I think that's something that I do see people struggle with. I saw it, even my friend Joel, I think when he was playing War Machine, he was very much always in the mindset of like, oh, this play is good as long as I roll average, right?
yeah.
And but you just don't always roll average. And you
Mhm.
see a lot of people, and I'm not trying to pick on my buddy Joel, but I feel like a lot of people go into plays and go, if I go average, this is a great play. If I go slightly below average, this could lose me the game. And that's certainly something that you have to think about at times. You're like, how all in is this play? And you don't have the certainty of it in the way that you would in a card game where you're like, unless literally one of us plays a spell, this fight is going to go based on this rough math.
Yeah, I mean, like to kind of relate that back though. I mean, like let's take a look at like in Magic, you draw your opening 7, and you look at the go. Okay, the probabilities I can play this on turn 1, this on turn 2. I need to draw into at cards X, Y, or Z
Yeah.
over my next 3 draws, and you still have 53 cards in your deck, and you're hoping to draw one of 12 cards. So there's still the same thing going on there. It's just in a different way of doing it. You're not rolling dice; you're drawing cards instead.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's also the element, right? In a lot of card games, if you go to a tournament or something, each round is a best 2 out of 3. And that's not really feasible for miniatures games because we've got like a 2 hour game.
Yeah.
It would be kind of interesting to do just like an 8-person tournament spread out over the course of like a full convention or something, where you play a best 2 out of 3. But if you win 2 games and everybody else is playing their third game, you have like a whole 2 hours to fuck around. So, do you have any preference there? Because I know you are still playing card games more than I do. Do you like assuming the time is roughly the similar, like say it was actually 2-hour rounds, which I know isn't the case for most card games, but do you like the idea of the 2 out of 3 with shorter games versus the one longer experience that you get out of miniatures?
I prefer the longer experience I get out of miniatures myself personally. I mean, just because I've played, like, I've made it a conscious effort to make that shift over
Yeah.
to primarily playing. So I do like the longer because there's more of an interaction and more of just like hanging out with your friends or even, you're just more engrossed in the game. We're like sitting down playing 2 out of 3 in Magic, or I was playing in a Star Wars Unlimited event yesterday, but playing in one of those, it's just like you sit down. And you're so focused on running through your deck and doing your thing that you're not really interacting in the same way. So I think that's like, for me, that's more of the pull towards it, I guess. I know I'm kind of going on a little side tangent.
Well, you are friends with Aubrey. Aubrey's
Yes.
going to rub off on you a little bit. We're aware. Obviously, but in Shatterpoint, right, we kind of have a 2 out of 3 game that you play. Do you feel like, as a person who still loves the card games, that the fact that Shatterpoint kind of has this best 2 out of 3 element, that you like that more than the other miniatures games you've potentially played in the past?
I think so. I think that's maybe that I've never even thought about that until you kind of brought that up right now. But yeah, I mean, I do. I think that is kind of a draw for some of the people like that, like the card game style, where it's like, okay, well, I dropped my first game, I still can come back and win my next 2. So yeah, I think I do kind of like that. I like that idea. Looking at it, especially, I think that's one of the things I really like, even in comparison to like playing MCP. I would say that I enjoy that aspect more.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think also, if we think about like the sideboarding elements of card games, you could build a Shatterpoint team that's more geared towards Struggle 2 and 3,
Mhm.
right? Where, I definitely like the element of like, I'm going to come to a table. We've never necessarily played a game before. You may not know exactly how I play this team, and you've got to adapt on the fly to how I play this. Right? Where it's not like, okay, now you've seen how I play it, and we're gonna play a whole nother game, and now you know my strategy, you know what I like to do, and how you adjust to that in a totally fresh, change your deployment, all of those things. But you still get a little bit of that, right? And I think like Thrawn in particular can be particularly crazy in like a second and third struggle, where you could definitely win struggle 2. And I mean, I've lost to Thrawn at a GT in like, I won struggle 1, and then Thrawn takes struggle 2 and 3 from me. That
Yep.
shit just happens.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the nice aspect of it, is that you have those. That's the nice pull. I think that kind of is the pull for some of the people that do play on those card games, where it's like, okay, they can see that aspect of it, where there is that comeback area to it.
Yeah, definitely. Now, one of probably the largest shift from card game to miniatures game like Shatterpoint is how critical positioning is. There are very few card games that really like have a positioning element. There was a positioning element in War Machine High Command back in the day, but I imagine nobody who's watching this has probably ever played that. But it's like, at the last GT, I definitely won a game over a 1 millimeter positioning decision. And it wasn't even really a decision. It sort of happened accidentally. But that's something that there's a kind of a big learning curve with that coming from card games. Did you felt like that was something that was easy for you or took a lot of time? What are your thoughts?
No, that was definitely a big challenge going into miniature gaming, and it's even more so, I think, that cause like with Warhammer, it's more forgiving because it was like a wider, larger
Yeah.
army and everything along those lines. But when you go into like Shatterpoint, because you only have at most 6, well, let's see, 8 models on the board, it's very critical on like making sure that is their positioning is exactly where you need it to be, or it can just cost you the entire game. So that is something that I think is, unfortunately, like, you don't realize it until you lose to it, but it definitely is one of those that a learning curve that you have as far as the card game side of it, because it's not anything that you experience at all.
And honestly, I still definitely don't feel like I have the Shatterpoint positioning solved, right? Where those early game plays where you advance up and you're like, do I want to be range 2 back from the central objective to maybe make it so their melee character can't get to me and like hit me in the face? Or do I want to be further forward and maybe make it harder for them to shove me off with their guns? But you don't know which one they're going to activate next, and they don't know which one they're going to activate next. And
Exactly.
so it feels very challenging, which is fun. But I can definitely see that probably being the largest like step or barrier to kind of overcome as you're switching between the two, because I mean, in general, positioning is what kind of makes the miniatures games like Shatterpoint end up being so mentally engaging for us. Do you agree with that?
Oh, without a doubt. And I think that one of the things that we don't even think about, like, on in the beginning, is like, okay, I'm going to move up and be I'll say it within range 2 of the objective, but on the back end, so you can't, you can't melee into me. But the next step of that is, well, if I activate them again, let's say you moved a primary or whatever. Well, if I
Yeah.
Shatterpoint that primary, how far can I move? What am I going to do with their next movement? Can I get them to where I potentially want to be? So it's like there's a whole nother level, not just what your opponent will do to that your placement, but how does that placement impact where you're going to go the next time you move your character and everything along those lines. So there's a lot of aspects to it that I think you can dive even deeper into as you start to explore that, which is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, definitely in the case of Shatterpoint, I find constantly it's really interesting how much a quarter of an inch makes a difference. Where you're like, I am just barely outside of that getting to that ladder, or I'm just barely within getting to that ingress point, or I'm just barely going to get in range for this shot. There's so many situations that it feels like a very, very small decision can be really impactful, and you're making so many of those over the course of the game, kind of builds up to a really interesting dynamic. And I love, like, Ryan is one of my primary opponents over here, and we talk about how often these really very small positioning decisions end up making a huge difference. Or you're like, oh, I want to dash past this person and then not be engaged, but they're positioned perfectly. So I am engaged by them, but if I try to move past them, I will still be engaged. It's stuff like
Yeah.
that.
It's amazing. We call it being accidentally tactical when we put them in the perfect position,
Yeah.
because we don't actually do it on purpose, but it just accidentally was a great tactical movement.
I feel like Ryan does it on purpose. He just doesn't want me to have joy. So I do want to say, though, I feel like it's probably easier to come into a miniatures game having some of the card game background. Like, I always talk about the concepts that you learn in Magic, right? Where you've got to figure out if attacking is a beneficial play for you, right? And so you have to do the mind game of just like, oh, if I attack with this 2/2 creature, they have a 1/3 blocker, so if they block, I don't lose anything. The worst case is, I take a damage. You just have to go, okay, what's the best block for them? Okay, that's not bad for me. The worst consequence is that they deal me 1 damage. And you learn those sort of basic things without having to factor in all of the positioning and stuff, right? And you've got to a certain extent, be able to do that, where you got to go, okay, if I do this, what's the best counterplay? Now, to a certain extent with Shatterpoint, because you don't know who they get to activate next, that's a little bit harder to calculate. Do you both agree that learning the concepts in a card game is really beneficial? And what are your thoughts on Shatterpoint? Seems harder to predict what your opponent's going to do.
So yeah, yes and no. I mean, so as far as like, does that help you? Yes, but the concepts that you learn from playing in Magic and the analytics that you're going to make as a player of, okay, do I attack? How do I attack? How do I like do what? Like, for example, attacking a planeswalker, attacking a person. What do you attack? When are you attacking? Who do you attack with? all of those decision trees that you go through are going to translate very well to Shatterpoint. So you definitely want to. That is a very transferable skill. As far as like, is it more difficult in Shatterpoint? I think it's just a matter of like changing how you think about it. I mean, if you can look at, like, I look a lot of times, I'm looking at what my opponent has in their, what they've played already, what cards are left, what are their ideal plays in response to the plays that I'm going to be making. Like, okay, I'm playing with this character, they still have these characters left to go in their order deck. If I do this, what is their most ideal response? Is that going to be the best play for me? So I think there's still, that is still there. It's just a matter of taking that extra step to do it, not just thinking in the moment of the one character, of what you're doing with that one character, but like maybe going one step deeper. But then you're that might take,
Well,
the
so
game
here's
go
an
long.
example that came up in a game that I was playing literally yesterday. I was activating Dark Troopers. It was Padme and Handmaidens were on that side of the board, and I wanted to take the point, and I needed to shove the wounded Handmaiden off the point because Padme was making it count for scoring. And then Padme was still going to be there unless I also shoved her off. So I also needed to get both of the Dark Troopers there, and I also wanted to avoid spending force if I could. So the first shove works, and I get the Handmaiden away, and I jump, get a free jump with that Dark Trooper. So now the second Dark Trooper, I've got to actively make a decision. I could attack Padme, go for the shove to get her off the point if I can. But if that fails, if I go for that and like one shove doesn't get her off the point, that Dark Trooper is actually impeded by terrain. So I can't just one shove and fall off the terrain to be on the ground level objective. But I was like, but I could shoot the Handmaiden, and then I can shove a different direction. And one shove guarantees that I get the second Dark Trooper on there, which guarantees that I take the point. But there's obviously a bigger payoff, right? Shooting Padme, she's not wounded. I get damage on her. I get her off the point is more beneficial on later turns. But if I go for that and don't get it, I score nothing.
Right.
And those are the kind of really subtle decisions that we've got to think about every single game. And maybe if you're new to the game, you may not even be thinking about shooting a wounded character.
No, not at all. Yeah, no, and I think that's kind of one of the things is like just what are the past, like, and I think that's, I say it a lot on our podcast where it's like, think about your lines of play, and it's just the same in Magic or any card game. There's a line of play that you're going to play, an order that you're going to do things, and you want to think about that like, okay, here's the line of play that I'm going to with each attack. You decided I can attack this way or I can attack that way. It was more beneficial to attack the Handmaidens than it was to attack your, Padme. So, which sometimes you just have to take that step back and think about what are the best lines of play for your particular action you're going to be taking.
Yep, makes sense. All right, just a couple more questions before we wrap this up. One thing that I've noticed, having played miniatures games now for a very long time, whenever I try to go back to a card game, I have a really hard time telling if I'm actually good at it. Right? Like, so I played Keyforge for a bit, which was the Richard Garfield game. And I'd gotten a deck. I loved the deck. I was playing it online all the time. I probably was winning 90+% of my games with it. And then I brought it to a tournament. I went 2-2. And I was like, am I good? Like, did I just hit bad odds? And I just didn't know. And I'm curious if it's like that for you. I feel like I can tell in a miniatures game very quickly if I'm like in the zone, if I built a good list, and like how I'm playing with it. I have a hard time to tell. And I know you just did a Star Wars Unlimited. Do you feel like it's harder to tell if you're good at a card game?
I think so. I think if you're good and like you're the one putting in the effort and putting in like the just grinding like crazy, you're gonna know you're good. But if you're just picking it back up and you're like, oh, I played a couple games and you had a good run or two, yeah, you're like, okay, I'm feeling pretty good, confident, and then like that's kind of how I was. I was feeling confident with the thing I went to, and I ended up going 4-3 at the event. I felt I did. I mean, for not playing the game very often, but it's one of those where you don't. I don't think you're going to be able to analyze it as easily because there's a lot more variables in the card games because of how deck building goes. There's a lot more known information in a miniatures game when you're going across the table from compared to like a card game. Keyforge, I think, like they play in, isn't it like they're all pre-made decks, so you know exactly what's in it. But like for example, Magic, you don't know anything until they start flipping
Yes.
over cards. So there's so much unknown information, and like you might run into things that you've just never seen before, where all the information like is known, and that I think that makes it easier for you to identify how good of a player you are because you're always walking into a known situation.
Yeah, that's certainly fair. There's also just the element of, I think in general, a lot of the card games that we talk about do have a larger player base than almost any of the miniatures games that we end up playing, which
Mhm.
is naturally going to like, it's easier to be the big fish in a little pond, so to speak. And you can see it if you just compare like old school NFL to like the way that things are now, where there's bigger contracts, there's more people playing, there's more people spending more time preparing for all of these roles and such, that it's just harder.
Right.
And you're definitely, the bigger a game gets, the more that like top 1%, top 5% is going to be really fucking hard. And you can easily be like, oh, I was a top 1% in this little small game. Is that necessarily going to carry over when there's 100 times as many people playing? Probably not.
Probably not. Yeah, exactly. I mean, like a local event for Shatterpoint here, will be usually we can get like 8 to 16 players.
Yeah.
The Star Wars Unlimited event that I played in yesterday had 82, so
you know, right.
significantly more.
Yeah, absolutely. And like even like when our War Machine events were like easily 32 plus and our bigger events were like 64, the same area could do would have like multiple Magic tournaments going on at every single store that were all like 100 people.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
there's definitely a size difference for that kind of stuff. But
Without doubt.
um overall, I think this is probably a journey that a lot of people experience. Like, there's only like Mike DeLuca is probably the only person I can think of who just kind of got into miniatures and didn't come to it from something like Magic. But then he tried Marvel Snap, which tried as well, which is its own kind of craziness of the card game scene.
It is for sure.
Um, but did you have any final thoughts on the adjustments from card games to miniatures games that just kind of didn't get into the conversation as we went naturally?
No, I think we covered most of it. I think one of the things that always sticks out to me is that there is when you're going from one to the other, I think there is transferable skills as far as like analyzing the cards in say Magic. You look at the cards, you analyze it. This is a good card. This isn't a good card, and being able to determine, what are the best things for you to do for your play style, this, that, and the other. That transfers. There's skills that transfer as far as identifying what works for you, what doesn't, and I think people need to take advantage of utilizing that skill set that they have learned over their times of playing whatever card game they play is finding that balance, I guess. I'm not trying to find the right word for it, but finding what play style works best for them, and doing that is, I think, is going to be something that you can definitely do as you're playing the game, and players need to work on and not lose those skills. Like, take that analytical side of your brain that you use in the card games and transfer it over, because you're still going to use all that analytics.
Yeah, and I think there's also elements of style things that you can go back. Like I was talking with one of the store employees at Mox maybe a month or so ago, and I was just talking to him about the Revenge list that I was playing with Shatterpoint, and I was noticing how when I was playing Revenge, it was a lot easier for me to stay in a game. It was harder to tilt. I'm not saying that I tilt a lot, but I was noticing that I wasn't feeling as burnt out after a game, and I was staying more mentally invested, and I was realizing that just the way that Revenge plays, and that natural element of like, oh, you spiked and wounded my dude, but at least I get to do this healing thing, right?
Mhm.
Having that element kept me in the game more and kept me on a more mentally high note as a longer day went on. And I was talking to him about that, and he was like, how can I apply that to Magic? Like, how can I are there decks that I could build that would kind of reward me when things go wrong, that would, kind of help me stay in over the course of a long tournament or something. Because that was something I never really heard Magic players talk about, was the long events and how you stayed mentally in the zone. And I'm sure they probably do. I just never encountered it because you were on a higher level than I was for Magic. I was kind of in that, if you're not a professional, I probably beat the shit out of you, but I never crossed the threshold into like pro tour stuff.
Yeah.
But I think, again, I never heard them talking about like, oh, how do you stay in the zone over an 8-round event, right? Which you might play all in a single day. But that's something we talk about a lot in miniatures, probably because you stand more often. How do you stay in?
And I think that's I think that's part of it. Like what you touched really on one of the things is like physically on your body. There's more that you're doing with miniature gaming than Magic. Like there's the mental load. I think is pretty even as far as that. But like the physical load, I think that's one of the things. I looking at miniature gaming, like there's times where it's like, okay, I need to make sure I'm sitting down and letting my body rest, and I'm not getting so tense over it. And I think there is something to be said about that, where it's like, being able to just sit and play your cards it has an impact on you. So I think that's one of the things that we definitely like as far as the load of it is concerned. I think that has a greater impact than I think we give it credit for. But as far as like, I think I take a lot of like the things that, going back to, you talked about Mike DeLuca, he had a great podcast where he was talking about, I think he was talking about like tilt a little bit, but more along the lines of just how he takes breaks in between each rounds, and he takes that 5-10 minutes, whatever you need to go and read.
I messaged him after that episode, and I was like, dude, that episode was zen as fuck. Like,
right?
I loved your mindset of just how like you're practically meditating, going into rounds, and like getting your mind in the right space. And I think that applies to all of this stuff. Card games, miniatures games. If you can get yourself in that right headspace, you're 100% going to do better.
And I think that's, like I said, it translates everywhere. I mean, that translates to cards. I mean, because yes, there's less time in between rounds, but take that 30 seconds, take that minute, whatever time that you're able to get for yourself, refocus yourself, clear your mind, get back into it. And I think that's one of the things that, like I said, there's a lot of transferable skills. It's not just paper versus plastic type of a thing.
Yep, totally fair. Anyway, this has been a super fun discussion. I hope it's interesting for everyone. But if you have not checked out, you should all absolutely go listen to Momentous Struggle. And I hear you guys are also posting some stuff on your YouTube channel as well.
Yeah. When I can get everything rendered properly, I think me and technology are not friends all the time. So whenever I can get them rendered properly, I do try and put our episodes up on YouTube as well, so that they are there for people that prefer to watch us on video instead.
You are very beautiful, so I can understand why people would want to watch you on YouTube. But
well, I appreciate you.
Do you have any closing thoughts before we wrap up, Todd?
No, I don't. I mean, I guess I do have one. I mean, if I would always encourage anyone, whatever game you're playing, to try to something different. Like if you are a card game player, give a miniatures game a chance. You might find that it's something more that really kind of resonates with you, and you never know until you give it a shot. So always try something new and explore all the different things in the world, because they're always you never know what might bring you joy until you try it.
Absolutely. And I think that's a fantastic spot to close out things. So again, Todd, thank you so much for chatting with me. And listeners, watchers, make sure to check out Momentous Struggle. And because it's a YouTube show, the most OP thing that you can do is like and subscribe, so you encourage me to do more of this shit. Later, nerds.
Hell yeah.